So, back in 2025, China made this huge move. It tried to basically put the world's high-tech industries in a chokehold by weaponizing its most critical resource, rare earth minerals. The goal was to force the West to bend to its will. But, and this is the wild part, that plan is backfiring in a way almost no one saw coming.
And you really have to understand why this was such an aggressive, jaw-dropping move. The new rules didn't just stop the flow of materials. No, they went way further. They also banned the export of the refining technology, the equipment, even the intellectual property you need to process these elements. It was a total lockdown.
This whole strategy rolled out in two big waves. First, in April, they hit the world with restrictions on 7 key elements. And boom, instant chaos. But they weren't done. Just a few months later, in October, Beijing just doubled down, expanding the ban to cover a whopping 12 out of the 17 rare earth minerals.
All right, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to look at China's big gamble, what made them so confident, this supposedly unbreakable monopoly they had, and then how it all just blew up in their face. We'll get into how the world woke up, the mad race for alternatives, and finally, this incredible paradox of power.
Okay, first up, the gambit itself. This wasn't some random decision. It was a very calculated play by Beijing to use its dominance in a whole new way. And the intended result? Super simple, really. Cut off the essential ingredients for, well, the entire high-tech economy, and Western nations would have no choice but to fall in line.
And let me tell you, this was a powerful threat. We're not talking about some obscure materials here. Rare earths are literally the lifeblood of modern technology. They're in the magnets that run everything from electric cars and giant wind turbines to the most advanced military hardware like the F-35 fighter jet. I mean, each one of those has over 900 pounds of this stuff inside.
Which brings us to the next big question. Why did Beijing think this move was a checkmate? Well, for decades, they had carefully, methodically built what looked like an absolutely unbreakable monopoly. And it wasn't just luck or geology. It was because they were willing to accept the huge environmental costs and undercut global competitors to drive them right out of business. It really all came down to some pretty staggering numbers.
For starters, let's talk processing. Over 90%, all rare earths on the entire planet are processed in China. That's the crucial and often pretty environmentally damaging middle step that turns raw ore into something you can actually use.
And before you even get to processing, there's the mining itself. While other countries have deposits, China digs up nearly 70% of all the world's ore. They dominate the very start of the supply chain.
Here's the real chokehold, the knockout punch. For heavy rare earths, we're talking the most valuable, most militarily sensitive elements, China holds a complete 100% monopoly on refining. Nobody else on Earth could do it at scale.
So you add it all up, mining, processing, refining. China's control was just overwhelming. On paper, it seemed impossible for the world to function without them. It looked like a completely unbeatable hand.
But then the plan started to unravel, creating this massive, self-inflicted wound, and not on the West, but on China's own economy.
And it happened fast. Almost immediately, Chinese exports just fell off a cliff. Shipments to the United States dropped by 37%. And even more importantly, exports of high-value magnets, a key Chinese industry, plummeted by 58% globally. The very industries China wanted to protect were the ones getting hammered.
The fallout was instant, and it was global. You had major car companies like Ford having to pause production. Auto parts suppliers in Europe were literally shutting down plants. See, the ban wasn't just hurting governments. It was causing real chaos for the very corporations that were China's biggest customers.
And all that chaos, it sparked something Beijing clearly did not expect. Instead of surrender, the world woke up. It was like a global alarm bell went off. Governments and corporations all realized just how dangerous their dependence was, and they decided it was time to act together.
An informal alliance took shape almost overnight. You had the US and the EU calling for an emergency pact against what they called strategic economic coercion. And they were joined by key partners like Australia, Japan, South Korea, and India, all determined to break that monopoly.
And this wasn't just talk. They took real, concrete action. The US poured money into reopening its Mountain Pass mine to build a domestic mine-to-magnet supply chain. Australia launched a massive new project for heavy rare earths. The EU drafted new laws to slash their dependency, and India even started getting creative, experimenting with recycling e-waste to extract these minerals.
But the response went way beyond just finding new mines. The real game changer was a full-on global race to innovate the dependency away entirely, to design new technologies that don't need these minerals in the first place. This suddenly became a matter of national security and economic survival.
So you had the world's top engineers shifting from designing with rare earths to designing around them. And all of a sudden, we saw these rapid breakthroughs in rare earth-free magnets and new electric motors that used way, way less of the material.
And this wasn't just happening in a lab somewhere. Major companies were leading the charge. Tesla cut its rare earth use in new motors by a quarter. Toyota developed motors using less than half what they used to. And you have startups like Neuron Magnetics now building entire factories just for rare earth-free magnets, with backing from giants like GM and Volvo.
And this all leads us to the central paradox of this entire story. By weaponizing its greatest strength, its monopoly, China inadvertently triggered a global movement that started to make that very strength obsolete.
So that really brings us to the key question. What was the fundamental miscalculation? Why did a strategy that looked so powerful on paper completely fall apart in reality?
Here's the thing. China's dominance was never about some unique geological advantage. It was about global complacency. The rest of the world had simply allowed Beijing to take the lead because, frankly, it was cheaper and easier. The ban shattered that complacency overnight.
Because of the ban, a whole new global strategy was born. You hear these words all the time now. De-risk, diversify, and decouple. This is now the guiding principle for Western economic policy, a direct reaction to the threat. And China didn't just inspire this change, they accelerated it.
So in the end, what was meant to be a show of absolute strength actually revealed a deep vulnerability. The world didn't surrender. It adapted and innovated faster than ever. So the final question is, as new mines open and new technologies emerge, has the world truly learned its lesson about the danger of these critical dependencies? This story is far from over.